Hi, this is Matt Donegan from Challenger Stories. I'm here with Alan Rook. Alan is the founder of BlackRook Media. So,
Hi
Alan, what
there.
does BlackRook Media do?
Well, we're a media services company and we operate globally across corporate film, events, live streaming, pop-up TV channels, I suppose broadly speaking, media coaching and broadcast consultancy, all of those areas.
You come from a fairly prestigious broadcast background. Tell me firstly about your background, and then I'm going to ask you about how you founded BlackRook Media and what was the motivation for doing that. So let's start firstly with your history.
So the background, the shorthand version is I trained as a journalist out of school. I got an apprenticeship on a local newspaper and did that for a few years, and then got an opportunity at a fairly young age to get into journalism in broadcasting with ITV regionally. It was the launch of Meridian, which took over the old ITV franchise from TVS down in that part of the country. And I got on board as a bulletin producer at that stage, and fairly rapidly through the years that followed, got to become a television reporter and presenter, and latterly a producer and manager. And then I moved about ITV into daytime television. I was editor of This Morning. I was a head of news at what was GMTV and became Daybreak. More on that perhaps later. And I've run bits of ITV News and current affairs regionally and as part of the national team that looks after ITV News as well. So BlackRook Media is focused probably at the moment, and we've flexed a bit over the years. When I first left ITV, we were very much into broadcast consultancy, helping mentor and launch new channels and come up with program formats and help sort of develop those for new stations. We did quite a lot of that, but there's not a lot of that work about, and television in the traditional sense is obviously undergoing a very rapid transformation, and those opportunities are probably fairly thin on the ground. But content channels more broadly have exploded.
Yeah.
And where we're really aiming our efforts is in the area of corporate film, documentary, journalistically driven films, not really advertisements, but films that examine issues and agendas and priorities of companies and how they relate to their clients and partners. And also in events, we sort of really champion the idea of a pop-up TV channel at an event, live streaming. So not just from the keynote stage, but produced content like a television channel, like a news channel, I suppose, where you line up a lot of keynote speakers, thought leaders, and you interview them live, and you wrap around that some more considered and crafted films that help tell the story as well. So that events TV and corporate film is really where our emphasis is in 2025, 2026.
Yeah. And why I was keen to talk about what part of the market that you offer real value to was primarily because that background that you have, that really strong editorial content background, very high quality, pretty much top of the tree, integrating that with large corporates, large organizations, trade bodies, that's a core strength, isn't it? Because it's not just about turning up with the cameras, plugging in some feeds, having a background, putting some lights up, pointing the camera and saying action. It's actually about what's the story behind this? Why is this content important, and who is it important to? That's correct, isn't it?
It is. And, there aren't any sort of hidden secrets here. There aren't many marketers who might watch this who wouldn't understand this, or even any owners of companies who don't get this. But if you're putting content out there and it feels like an advert, it feels just like a piece of promotional puff video that is just there to big them up, their services or products, it's got a value if it's pitched as an advert. But what has greater value is to come up with ideas for content that engage, in some cases, a niche audience that you can assume if they're looking at it's already interested. So you've got to offer them a little more depth. So journalistic rigor around that is, okay, we might talk about the interview in advance and the ground we're going to cover, but we need to be quite robust and probing in the questions we're asking so that there some real value can be elicited from those interviews. That sort of authentic interrogation and the opportunity to sometimes confront some potentially negative issues, we think adds power to companies' messaging. Yeah. It makes them appear in touch and understanding the real world and giving answers that actually give value and expand the viewer's knowledge or further a debate of some sort. Obviously, a lot of what we do, as with everyone, has been in the area of sustainability for the last several years, and there's a lot of interest in that across the whole population. So most companies are keen to explore those issues around ESG, and we spend a lot of our time working in those areas.
We're also living in very different times with regards to media and manipulation. There's a lack of trust in many of the media channels that are out there. Having something that looks and smells like an ad, having something that looks, to all intents and purposes, like it's branded content paid for by a brand, it's seen through very quickly. Yeah, in the media environment, we're almost living in a post-truth environment. It's a post-truth time. How important do you think it is, therefore, that when you are creating content, that it's hyper authentic, that it's very real and very believable and very considered?
Yeah, well, you open a can of worms there, both in that perception in the post-truth age and in the rise of artificial intelligence, where none of us immediately assume that we believe even the images that we're seeing, let alone the words that people are saying. So where we think we've got a bit of a shelf life here is the authenticity of that journalistic treatment. But also, to take an example, if you're dealing with a company that might be promoting an innovation, a product or a service, you don't just speak to those within the company. You would go down the long tried and tested testimonial route. So who's benefited from this? Who can speak to it? But you also go through a process of discussing the benefit of getting a completely outside voice, an industry observer or expert who has got credentials in their own right, that isn't necessarily a hired gun, but can actually sometimes put forward some provocative points that can be responded to. So authenticity is about the sort of degree to which you feel a company isn't just addressing the positives, but acknowledging some of the challenges and how they're coping with those things. And I would say that is a key differentiator. If you've got a team of, long established journalists, perhaps they're better equipped to do that. But that would be our approach generally, I think. We encourage people along those.
Well, so because you're experts in the field, you come from that journalistic background, you're very much grounded in understanding how you would best get across the point. What would be your 3 top tips for any client that was going to come to you and say, look, we want to create great content at, say, one of our events? You've got, say, an industry trade body. I know you guys are particularly strong with trade bodies and with trade associations. So I'm a trade association. I'm a trade association. I'm going to come to you and say, I want to use you guys. What would be your 3 top tips to that client to make sure they get the best value and authentic content?
So if you're making a proposition, you need to prove the proposition. So if you're saying something's good, why is it good? Let's see some evidence. Let's see some evidence that could be tested by a viewer if they did a bit of research themselves. So let's think of ways of promoting a product or service from your point of view that really gives it some muscle. The second thing is that you're never engaging in this as a presentation. It's got to be a conversation. If it appears like a presentation, then it fails. I think possibly, although I've listed it as number 2 in my list, it would be number 1. It'd be surprising how many times we get a request of people referring to a written note held off camera or asking for auto cue. And we say to people, in the majority of cases, what we do is recorded rather than live. I could talk about live separately, but don't be adherent to a script. Trust your own knowledge. And particularly when it's recorded, you don't have to get it right first time. But if it appears like a conversation, it's going to be much more relatable. And that even includes the ums and the ahs in natural speech. It doesn't have to be perfect. It makes you all the more human if there's a little bit of that in there. But, if there's a huge speech impediment or some issue like that, that may be different. It could be distracting. But even that in context is understandable if it's part of who that person is. But don't try and rehearse stuff. Just trust your own knowledge and react conversationally. And finally, I suppose, it's to think in pictures. When we visit companies, when we interview companies live, what are the things that engage a viewer? It isn't just what they say. So we want supporting imagery and we want to apply cinematography to our engagement with people, because that's another differentiator. We employ and use people who make feature films. And if you can think of ways of using visuals that bring the story to life, and really importantly also, much underestimated, a natural sound. If you're in an environment that naturally has a buzz about it, be it a factory or an area of outstanding beauty, let that noise come through so the viewers can appreciate the environment. And all of these things, the humanity, the access to the environment using production techniques, makes things much more relatable and interesting, frankly. How many times have you seen corporate films with people sitting in boardrooms or offices or in front of offices? It's dull as ditch water, so much so that sort of mentally part of you's turning off straight away. But if that person is being interviewed on the move through an area that's relevant to what they do, or they're explaining something that is happening behind them as part of the interview, that's far more engaging and it shows them being involved. So those, I would say, in a rather large nutshell, would be my top.
Yeah, no, that's really good, actually. So it's kind of content, contrast, and context. You put it like that. Making sure the content is...
It's going to be more engaging if you're seen in the environment that you're talking about, and that it looks visually interesting. If you occupy an interesting environment, it should be showcased. Yeah. And when you come to what you're talking about, you've got to come across authentically by speaking conversationally. You're not delivering a PowerPoint presentation, and you're not speaking to a room full of 3,000 people. What you're doing is treating it much more on a one-to-one basis. And if you do that, your message will carry more power.
So we talked a bit about what BlackRook Media does, what it's exceptionally good at. How did you get there? Because you went from primetime television or daytime television. So you mentioned Daybreak just now, and some of the other shows that you worked on were pretty much top of the tree. What was your journey to starting BlackRook Media from working on major ITV shows?
Well, when people ask me that question, I suppose I've got a couple of choices. I could give a slightly fudged version, or I could give the stone cold truth. And the stone cold truth is that when you get to that end of the pyramid, top of the pyramid in broadcasting, rather like football, if you've got one of the big clubs and you don't qualify for the Champions League, then a whole lot of uncertainty surrounds the situation. And I was involved in a programme that was the precursor to Good Morning Britain, that, it wasn't dreadfully successful for a number of reasons. And you could pick away at that for a long time, but it wasn't dreadfully successful. So the atmosphere was such that change had to come. And I was very near the top of that tree. There were, a number of other people in that situation. And it's perfectly, understandable, high stakes in commercial television. So I was at a point where we parted ways. And I thought, in my slightly more youthful arrogance, I was only just over 40 at that point, that, there would be lots of other opportunities immediately available to me. Well, it didn't turn out to be the case. To cut a long story short, I realised that, my future was in my hands, and I got an opportunity to consult on the launch of an African news channel. I got the chance to make some advertorial programs for the new local TV network that was sort of being launched around that time. And we got a chance to consult on location for foreign broadcasters in countries like Kurdistan. And suddenly, by putting the feelers out there, using the network that you build up over a long career, I found that opportunities started to come my way. And once you've got a bit of sort of corporate history under your belt in terms of delivering that sort of consultancy and those services, then it rolls on. And there have been ups and downs, but for 15 years now, we've, expanded that skill set. We've expanded still further that network, and we're doing pretty well. And I suppose it was a necessity as the mother of invention. I didn't want to go back down the ladder or particularly swap industries. So what do I do? What are my skills? And for many years, I was a manager involved in meetings all day, and I'd got a long way from what I'd first got into broadcasting for, which was the journalism, the meeting people, the amazing access you get to be in places that you wouldn't normally be in. And I found that in launching my own thing, I was back actually doing what I loved, which wasn't being a senior manager who had to be involved in decisions about making redundancies. It was to be in a position where you were creating something. So I sort of made my own luck, but in doing so, I'm fortunate, and I ended up doing what I love and what I got into the whole thing in the first place for.
Okay, so you ended up doing your first love. It was a journey that you went through. It sounds like, you've summarised it. It sounds like it could have been quite challenging, because when you are that Premier League player, and when the clubs that you want to play with and you think are going to come knocking at your door, to extend this analogy, don't, for whatever reason, you've got to find your own path. You've got to go out there and create your own way, right? So having been inside a very large organisation like ITV, which has got a very, in many ways, quite a linear career progression, that you see a lot in large organizations. So then going and starting your own business, what was that jump like? Was that a big culture shock for you?
Well, it was surprisingly exciting, actually. And I'll say this, there is a linear path within a company like ITV, but there's lots of lateral movement on the way. So, for instance, this isn't an opportunity to big myself up, but I would say of any of my peers at ITV over the sort of period from the early 90s through to this current day, actually, on your way up, it's a marvelous company in terms of give you the chance to do all sorts of things. So I was a producer of news. I was a presenter of news and current affairs. I was a producer of documentaries. I got lots of opportunity to get involved in other parts of ITV. So from news and current affairs to daytime television, which is a really different area. And breakfast television is a specific part of that. So all of that really put me in a very good position to have a wide range of skills. And my network includes lots of people like me, some of them much better than me, actually, who have got similar skills. And when we combined forces, we found that that mix of skills founded on the journalism at the beginning of it all was not commonly available in one package. You get organizations that offer bits of all of that. But the great thing about that broadcast career is it gave us as a group a broad range of skills. So the transition in what we could offer was perhaps easy. We could bring insights and skills that weren't easily available. But that's very different from having a long list of clients who are signing checks for you all the time. Yeah. And winning the business is always the biggest challenge, because you might be great, but if people don't know about you, it's rather difficult. So it's not who you know, but who knows you. That's the secret. And that is something we took quite a long time to master, and we're still working on it now. But, you know, people need to know what you do. And then there's a fine line between that sort of arrogant, blowing your own trumpet stuff and naked marketing that everyone's bombarded with, and that very elusive skill of effective networking. I don't think I'm that good at it now, really, but over time, I've worked out better ways to make contact with people and, you know, create new relationships that sometimes, not always, create new opportunities. And I've found very often, in fact, that I make a new connection, we get on great, things look promising, but it might be 2 years in the future that they come back to me and say, yeah, I thought of you. And then something comes from that. So that transition that you spoke about was a mixture of adrenaline, you know, finding out about the world of self-employment, running your own business, and how you acquire that new business, which, you know, had its peaks and troughs. There were real challenges there, but I think you have to be persistent and you have to believe in yourself. And I'm surrounded by great people, which makes it a lot easier.
Well, so you talk about challenges, and this is Challenger Stories, so let's talk about that. What have been the biggest challenges that you've had in developing the business?
So I'm not a businessman by training. What I'm is a journalist by training. And it's very easy to get excited when a bunch of opportunities come around. But I would say it's fundamental business things like managing cash flow effectively. It's great to have clients there, but the invoicing disciplines, the clear communication of when money's due, effectively chasing money without alienating clients when it's late, and managing the expectations of staff as well, and being transparent and clear about all those situations, that could be challenging at times. Mm-hmm. And I have been in positions in the past where I've done, and my team have done a great deal of work for clients to quite a high ticket price, and that money was never paid. And, you know, we've nearly been burned a couple of times because of that. So you have to do your due diligence on who you engage with. You can't be too wide-eyed about it. And I'm probably was too much of an innocent at the beginning of my career. And I found myself in that situation a couple of times where I'd provided a lot of services and got a lot of people on board working, and then that money wasn't forthcoming. So, or it's very slow in coming. And that can be quite traumatic, because you're dealing with treasured relationships, valued relationships with people who you work with, and they're counting on you to come across with the cash and manage this situation. So we've navigated it, we've survived, but those are some of the biggest challenges. That running a business, I think, is quite tricky if you come to it cold. You can't just rely on your own skill set. You've got to know a little bit more about the nitty-gritty of that.
It's interesting because you can you need a driving license to drive a car, but a business can be almost equally damaging in terms of its ability to be a wrecking ball. Businesses can, you know, they can shake up families, they can cause ill health through stress. They can, well, a lot of businesses fail. Over 90% of businesses won't last 10 years. So it's not easy. And you need a license to drive a car, but you don't need a license to drive a business. And driving a car is relatively simple once you've done it for a relatively short period of time. Building a business takes years.
It
Would
does.
you
It
have
does. And so many decisions along the way. And there isn't, there are, obviously, you know a lot about this. There are coaches out there, but even the investment in that sort of counseling is a big decision for startups. And, yeah, you have to feel your way. So my advice to anyone in that position is you just have to be very cautious and proceed with trust and optimism, but verify everything, do your due diligence, be really careful about, employing people on a maybe full-time staff basis too early, because, you're making a commitment to them and you can be careless with that. It's, when you take someone on as a member of staff, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
And you don't want to be jettisoning them, a year later, really. You want to be doing that when you know there's a good chance of longevity as part of the growth of the business, in my opinion. There are lots of things to navigate. And you're right, I didn't have my business driving license when I started it out. I just went for it and I made plenty of mistakes and probably still do, but we've survived.
That's par for the course, right? Running a business, no matter how well educated you are in business, you will make mistakes. Chances are you'll make less mistakes the more educated you are in the first place. But then the vast majority of entrepreneurs and business owners, and the vast majority of the workforce in the UK is employed by SMEs. So they should be cherished. They should be supported along their entrepreneurial journey. Was there one bit of support that you would have really appreciated in your entrepreneurial journey? Or conversely, was there one piece of support that you got that you thought, that's brilliant and that really helped change the game for you? So was there support that you wanted, or was there support that you got which really helped?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I can say that to answer the positive one first, what I was unaware of until comparatively recently was that through central government, and I'm talking about the last administration as well as the present one, there was a surprising amount of help and advice in working internationally. 80 to 85% of the work that we do currently is delivering media services in international locations, and that's Latin America, it's Europe and North America, it's Asia. We're all over the place, and there are loads of things to negotiate there, particularly when you're taking equipment with you. And there are different rules about working in different countries, even on a gig basis. And I've been very grateful for the guidance that I've got from international trade advisors offered up on a regional basis through central government. That's been great. So I think that's really been valuable. But I had no idea, no awareness of it. And I partly got that because my company joined a Chamber of Commerce here in the Midlands where we're based. And that was a gateway to a little more knowledge there. So that's on the positive side. In terms of advice I wish I'd had earlier, I suppose when you first start, most people are thinking about survival. How do I get to the next year quarter and stay liquid? How do I avoid carrying too much debt or any debt? But scaling, that's sort of the road map to growing a business. I think that's one of the most challenging and difficult things to do. It's really, we've been going for 15 years and we've been fairly consistent, but we've got an opportunity at the moment where growth is happening. Even now, after all this time, the sort of the moving parts you need to get to work together to effectively begin to scale. That could be a complicated sort of answer to come up with. And, I suppose it would have been great if there'd been more help around earlier in the formation of my business to look at those sort of issues, because I think that is a really great challenge, because opportunities can disappear. You need to make the most of them while you've got them. And that has been a little absent. So I regret the fact there wasn't more of that about, I suppose.
I think a lot of that comes down to business education. And the more that you learn about it, there's quite a few different studies on scaling businesses, etc. There's a question of you don't know what you don't know. And your background was creating quality content, and that still is your kind of day job. What you do is you set a high bar to the product that you deliver for your end user. The end user being two, actually. There's the client that pays you, and then there's the viewer that engages with your content, because you've got to be honest and true with both of those stakeholders. Having the balancing act of working on the business as well as not only in the business, but being that kind of guardian of the content, making sure that quality is always maintained and growing the business at the same time is a challenge. Well, it looks like you're rising to that challenge. So I'm going to take my hat off to you, because BlackRook Media is growing fairly substantially at the moment, isn't it? I mean, you're starting to scale a business. A lot of businesses, a lot of organizations are coming to you. We're kind of developing a bit of a waiting list, which is amazing. Congratulations for that. What's the next step for you then?
Well, the road to glory, as we see it, has always been this, and that is you over-deliver. And the client journey is essential. So we never promise anything we cannot deliver. And we always try to exceed expectations. Now, everyone says this. It's a sort of thing that sounds really great. But in video production, in producing content, live streaming, there are inherently so many critics in that chain. You talked about we're pleasing two stakeholders just now. Well, actually, very often it's many, many more than that, because if you're working with a corporate entity, there'll be the C-suite level people who have their decision, their opinion rather, is the one that really counts. But beneath them, there are tiers of middle management and marketing teams who can be numerous. And all of the people on those marketing teams would have an opinion. Many of those marketing people will have some knowledge, sometimes a deep knowledge of production as well. It's not sort of a uninformed view. So there are maybe half a dozen opinions there. And when we get the services that we provide scrutinized, or we seek sign off for a film, there may be a geographic split between teams as well. And there's a lag in getting feedback. So there's lots involved there. So what we always do is we're very careful in our process about how we seek reaction and feedback on what we've done, but we're working really hard always to make sure that we had explained exactly what we were going to do ahead of time. We deliver exactly what we promised, and where possible, we will exceed what we've promised. And that is really a key. And the other thing, it's all about relationships. So the growth that you talked about is largely predicated at the moment on our relationships with global trade and industry associations across various sectors. And we partner with them to amplify their messages around campaigns, industry priorities, around events. And in partnering with them, they give an introduction of that partnership to their membership. And when we get in there and get the chance to make the content, the success of the business has got to be wholly reliant upon those that we make the content for, saying, look, these guys were great to deal with and we loved what they did for us. Yeah. And then word within those industries spreads. And that's what we're benefiting from at the moment. Yeah. People look to the UK traditionally in film as a centre of excellence. They look to the UK in broadcasting, largely because of the BBC, but not exclusively, as a centre of excellence. So we have got a tradition behind us with our accents and ways of working that is very advantageous to an international market. And we try and live up to that. And that's where the opportunity is. Why would they deal with us in the United Kingdom when they could deal with someone locally? Well, we've got to give them a really good reason to do that. It's got to be because they perceive the quality and the depth of content that I was talking about before. And also, you've got to be very competitive in what you charge as well, because, you know, people really want value for money. The other thing I want to say about that is that we have absolutely switched on to the reality that it doesn't really matter how good the content is if you can't deliver an audience. And we are not a company that leaves that to other people. When we engage with an organization, we come up with a strategy for these are the sorts of things we can produce for you at volume. It's not just one film. We come up with an awful lot of extra assets and raw material that has a long shelf life, that is evergreen. But we've also got to come up with a strategy that's going to impress the rightly questioning marketing people about, all right, but who's going to see this? Well, we've got to have answers and numbers, and that is part of our job. So we talk about distribution as well as production, and that is the key to further expansion, I think. If you can do both of those things convincingly, you're onto a winner.
So Alan, it's fascinating actually listening to how that kind of landscape has changed. There are financial pressures. There are pressures in general against content, around the content and media industry in general. And you guys are very, very much bucking the trend. We're seeing a lot of reduction in the space. We're seeing a lot of production companies are really suffering. But you guys are bucking the trend, but you're bucking it because you're doing the right thing. You're delivering content for the right audience. You're bringing the skill sets to it. You're maintaining the bar, and then you're working smart in order to deliver content in a cost-effective way that I think, believe the expression is sweating the asset. It's getting that content asset out there and making sure it's used right across all the possible use cases to deliver maximum value for that investment, but doing it not just pointing a video camera at it, maintaining that quality. So look, I'll take my hat off to you. I think, BlackRook Media is going to continue to thrive. I can see that as the business is growing, you're developing the business, how you're starting to scale it, how you are scaling it is, I take my hat off to you. It's very encouraging.
Well, it's kind of you to say. I mean, we're very respectful of the realities, and they are that increasingly within marketing departments in companies, even a decent smartphone, and most of them are decent, can produce really high quality content. We're conscious that with artificial intelligence, there's a great deal of quality content that can be produced using that and through standard applications in terms of graphics and editing that take away the need for the human factor. So if people are going to spend money on actual human production, you've got to give them some pretty good reasons to do it at that higher end. And as I said, that's a mix between price point and the volume of assets that you can offer and the quality.
Yeah. Well, Alan, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today. I really want to find out what BlackRook are doing more. I'd love to see some of the assets that you have. Love to learn more about your client base, how the business is expanding. I think it'd be great to catch up with you in another 6 to 12 months so I can hear even more about what BlackRook Media is doing. I'm intrigued. You're one of the few production companies that I speak to, and I speak to a lot, who are seeing significant growth. And it's obviously because you're doing the right thing for your clients, because that's what it comes down to, right? They don't keep coming back if you're not delivering. And they don't keep coming back if you're not delivering value. It's not just product, it's value. So if you're doing both, then you've got a real chance to buck the trend and really fly. So Alan Rook or BlackRook Media, thank you so much. Thank you for spending time with me on Challenger Stories, and let's speak soon.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.